Howdy and welcome back to the workshop. We got a little bit different video planned for you today. I'm going to be going over my JS test set, my Journeyman Smith test set, the 6 knives that I made to bring with me to Bladeshow in Atlanta to see if I had what it takes to be called a Journeyman Smith on my road to Master Smith. Now I had a little bit of audio trouble in the very beginning of filming that, and so basically I built 6 knives, the first of which I did a video on, and then because I had such poor time management, I actually didn't film making the other 5. You only needed 5 to bring with you to the show, but I wanted to have a backup knife just in case something went wrong along the way. I always hear horror stories of like people's knives getting bent or rusted or something stupid happening on the way to Bladeshow or actually at the show itself. It gets a scratch on it, whatever. And so I built a 6 knife just to have that as a little bit of extra security along the way. So with that, here is my set. So the first knife in my JS set was obviously the giant Bowie that I built that I did a 2-part series on. If you haven't seen it, you should go check it out. It was about a month and a half of full-time work into that knife, and it ended up as 2 videos, which is kind of hilarious because, quite frankly, the majority of my time on that knife was spent doing this with 2000 grit sandpaper and just like adjusting minute lines and like little stuff. The next knife that I finished was a killer chef's knife. It had a just a little bit under 8-inch long blade, right at 2 inches tall at the heel, with a 954 aluminum bronze bolster and an African blackwood handle. So it's kind of in theme with the Bowie. It also had a 600 grit hand sanded finish on the blade. After I finished that knife, I finished the Integral, which ended up being, I think, my favorite knife of the set. It had a 6-inch long blade. It was very slim, very flowy. Like every other knife in the set, it was forged from Pop's Knife Supply 1085 round bar, which is just a good all-around steel. It's nice and easy to work with. It finishes out well, and it's right in that very versatile carbon range where it's got enough carbon to hold a nice edge for a chef's knife, but low enough carbon that it's going to do great in the chopping format of a Bowie. So the Integral had a sandblasted and cold blued bolster, which looked just killer in my opinion, and then a nice slim African blackwood handle. After that, the 4th knife that I finished was a hunting knife. It had about a 4.5-inch blade, bronze guard, and an African blackwood handle. This was the only one that I did a slight facet on where it flowed from the guard into the handle, and the reason why I did that is because I couldn't figure out a good way to make a centerline facet meet at the guard and flow into the handle. If I had pulled that line back to the point where I wanted that facet to be, it would have been a really awkward looking top of the guard to rounded finger choil area of the handle transition, and so I chose to add that facet in there, and I think it came out looking really nice. After I finished up the hunting knife, I moved on to the paring knife. The paring knife was a nice short little blade. It was also 1085. It was a little bit less than a 1/16 of an inch at the thickest point and came down to just a nothing edge, very slim, very light. It weighed 1.2 ounces overall, and again, bronze bolster, African blackwood handle, and it was a nice cute little match from the paring knife to the chef's knife. I think it came out looking really good. I'm really happy with how similar those 2 knives are. After I finished my paring knife, I moved on to my backup knife. This was a tiny little 3-finger Integral knife that matched the bigger Integral, although this one had a little bit more of a rotund blade, and the bigger one had kind of a more aggressive shape to it. So I finished up those last 5 knives in 10 days, and then had kind of a day to hang out and chill before I found out that the ricasso on the big Bowie had actually rusted. I found that out when my good friend Alex Steele was here, but with about an hour of fixing, it was back to being good. Light surface rust isn't super uncommon on carbon steel knives, and I use this stuff called Prelim. It's a Renaissance wax product. They call it a surface cleaner, and I put this stuff on a blue shop cloth and then I chopped the end of a popsicle stick so it had a chisel point to it. And I just got in there really fine and just scrubbed that stuff out. I ended up getting to keep most of the blackening in my maker's mark as well, and it didn't scratch at all. And so I was very happy to have this stuff. I've had this for 6 years and I've never had to use it before, but I'm glad that I had it now. So I finished all the knives on Monday. I was able to get everything packed up in time and head off for the airport at 3 o'clock the next day. I flew from there to Seattle and then took a red-eye flight that left at 10:45 p.m. and landed at 6:45 a.m. in Atlanta. Atlanta. I got about an hour of sleep on the plane, but I had plenty of energy because when I got to the airport, I hung out for another hour or two and waited for Niels Vandenberg of Black Dragon Forge. You may remember him from one of Alex's videos where we collaborated on a stiletto a couple of years ago, along with him and Josh Smith. So Niels and I met at the airport, and then his friend Mark picked us up. We had a great breakfast and then headed over to the Cobb Galleria to get settled in, find our tails, get our badges, and say hi to everybody. But over the course of Thursday, I showed my JS set to a couple of people, and the interesting thing is that I actually found some flaws in my blades that I could not see in here, even under the 5 LED panels above my bench or in the broad daylight. But for some reason, that dark ceiling with warm lights spread out showed me a couple weird little low spots in my blades that I really just couldn't see in here. They concerned me enough that I actually considered not even testing. That's how worried about them I was. So I first asked Josh Fisher, who's a mastersmith and actually one of the judges, whether he thought I should use my backup knife when I found something pretty significant in my paring knife. And he actually didn't tell me whether or not to use my backup knife or not. But I asked a couple other mastersmiths, and I spent a long time talking with Dino Tomfranco, who's an amazing mastersmith from down in Brazil, and he said he thought I should use my backup knife simply because it's a little bit more complicated of a knife to build. That V-shaped bolster, it's an integral. He thought that that was going to be the move. And he also kind of put my mind at ease. He noticed all of the flaws, and he still thought that they were probably going to pass. And so that definitely took a lot of anxiety off of me. There was about an hour and a half there where I was like really freaking out. But I got to walk around, say hi to friends, see some of my other Journeyman friends who were testing that year, Jeremy Yell, James Fleming, Matt Stagmar, and then just a bunch of other bladesmithy friends. I got to help unload the Cole Ironworks booth. They showed up literally at the very last minute they possibly could have on Thursday. But I got to see all my good friends who I don't get to see very often. It was a great time. This is the first year that I stayed in the Renaissance Waverly, which is the hotel at the Galleria, and I got to say it was nice to not have to walk a mile back and forth to the show, especially with knives and a big heavy rifle case and luggage and all that fun stuff. But late that night, after I had gone to bed, Ryan Brewer, who was another applicant for JS, texted me, said, "Hey man, do you have any sandpaper or anything to be able to fix a knife with?" He had a TSA agent leave a big old salty fingerprint right in the middle of one of his blades. He had packed them and he shipped them down with another friend who was flying, and he had them wrapped and oiled and waxed, and he had a note on top that said, "Hey, these are knives that are headed to be judged at an exhibition. Please do not touch the blades." And this TSA agent decides to go, absolute not the best move, which is just a huge bummer and kind of really sad when you think about it. So the next morning, thankfully, I had a little bench vise that I had brought with me. I had 600 grit paper. I had all of the good stuff, sanding sticks, everything that we needed. And so 15 minutes before we're supposed to be at the hall for testing, we're sitting downstairs. Rick Hall sits in a chair. We clamped the vise onto the back of the chair because it didn't open up wide enough to clamp on any of the tables in the hotel. And Ryan goes ahead and refinishes one of his Journeyman knives literally 15 minutes before we're testing. It was absolutely hilarious, but it worked out great. He got a great finish. It looked amazing. And so we headed upstairs right after that. Hanging out, nervously waiting. 7:30 a.m., they call us in to put our knives on the tables. There ended up being 41 people that tested for Journeyman and 6 that tested for Mastersmith. So after we get our knives on the table all laid out, we come back outside and wait. And then we have some snacks, we're telling jokes, we're all showing each other our backup knives, and then we wait for longer, and then even longer, and then we keep on waiting. And then finally they start calling in the Mastersmiths, and Nick Rossi is the first one to come out, and he passed. He did awesome. He had a great set. It was gorgeous. And then after that, Niels Vandenberg came out, and he passed, and they ended up actually being the only 2 Mastersmiths to pass this year out of the 6 that applied. So huge congrats to Niels and Nick Rossi. Check them out here, Black Dragon Forge and Nick Rossi Knives on Instagram. Great guys. Go check them out. So after the Mastersmiths come out and they're done with their judging, then they call in about 8 or 9 journeymen to go into the room. They actually had to reserve a different room this year because there were so many applicants testing. So it wasn't in the normal place. Thankfully, the lighting in that room was a lot better than it was in the Galleria Hall. And those guys kind of all came out, and none of them were smiling, which was really not fun to watch because I knew some of the guys that went into the room. But After that, they called in the rest of us, and we went and stood by our set. And so the first round of guys, I don't believe any of them passed, and only a few didn't pass from the second group that were called in. And so each of the 7 judges had written checkmarked passed or failed, whether or not they passed or failed us, and it was a majority vote to pass Journeyman. You could have 3 judges fail you, but if 4 passed you, then you were good to go. And so they each had like a little note that they had written, and I had a note from Dave Lish on mine to do less flashy plunges, but other than that, it was all good feedback, and I got a unanimous 7 out of 7 passed, as did James Fleming, Jeremy Yell, Kurt Holland, Rick Hall, Matt Stagmar, and a bunch of other just awesome folks. We had the largest class of journeymen that passed this year, I believe 31, which is way bigger than any other class of journeymen that has ever passed. In fact, 31 is more than most classes have applicants by far, but that was how we kicked off Friday morning, and kind of the whole rest of the day was a little bit of a blur. I ended up selling my whole journeyman set and the backup knife to Daniel O'Malley, who was one of my most influential mentors. Daniel is a bladesmith and a knife purveyor, so he sells custom knives as well as production knives, but I grew up about 15 minutes away from his old shop, and I used to spend between 10 and 20 hours a week in his store looking at knives. Every piece that I made for like 2.5 years I took into Daniel to have him critique it, and he didn't hold back any punches. He would call me out on the scratches that I missed, the misaligned fit-ups, if the lines didn't look good. He would call me out on all that stuff, and it really transformed me as a maker. It made me hold myself to a very high standard, even after I stopped taking all my knives to him when I moved to Montana. Daniel also wrote one of my Eagle Scout recommendation letters, and he really had a huge amount of influence on me, especially as a younger man. I'm very thrilled that I got to sell him those knives, so my whole journeyman set will be available through bladegallery.com. It takes them a little bit of a while to process all the knives after Blade Show. They buy a lot of knives at the show and bring them back, and they have to photograph them all and write up descriptions for everything. I will post on here or in a video. It'll probably be seen first on Instagram when they're up for sale on Blade Gallery, but I'll definitely let you guys know. Blade Show is such a blast getting to hang out with the folks that you only get to see once or twice a year. So Saturday and Sunday were kind of a blur. I ended up packing all my JS knives into my backpack and walking around rather than standing behind my table. I really like to walk around Blade Show. I get to see the makers that I am excited to see their work, and since I didn't have any knives left for sale, I didn't really want to be stuck behind my booth. I didn't really want to be stuck behind my table and not get to see the folks that I really wanted to see while I was at the show. Saturday night came around, which is the awards ceremony for Blade Show, and the last minute on Saturday I decided to submit my JS chef's knife for the best kitchen knife category, and I ended up bringing home the gold. I won my first Blade Show award for best kitchen knife 2022, which is a huge honor. I honestly was rather surprised. So it's just a huge honor to have this award to remember that show by. It was just a great show. I'd have a hard time imagining what it would take to have a better Blade Show than that. Getting to pass my journeyman along with so many of my really good friends, I got to see so many cool makers that I just adore and idolize, and then being honored with this award and getting my journeyman stamp, it was just a great time. So overall, it was a wonderful trip. I slept so much when I got back. It was great, kind of finally refueling and catching up on everything, but I had a great time. So huge shout out to Alicia Newton, who organized Blade Show and got everything up and running, and pleasure to meet you to everyone who I met at the show. I look forward to seeing everyone next year. I will also be at Blade Show West in Salt Lake City this year, and I should have a table there and things for sale. I don't plan on selling anything before I go, so I actually have some stuff on the table to buy. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment down below on some projects you'd like to see done, whether it's a machine you'd like to see be restored, or a weird project or knife you'd like to see me make. And I'll catch you on the next one. Goodbye.